One of the reasons why the Enlightenment philosophers seem to have become a sort of fulcrum of dispute in recent years is because they are living in an age in which all of the things we now see as the worst vices, let's say, of Western history are going on. The Enlightenment philosophers are working in an era where the slave trade is underway. They're working in an era in which colonialism is going on. A number of Enlightenment thinkers have been attacked because they've invested, for instance, in one or other of these trades. Others, it's because, as with Hume, of a sentiment in their writing, which by modern standards is undoubtedly held to be wrong. But it's not satisfactory, is it, to sort of lump them all in like this, because the number of views and different attitudes towards these things going on in their time differed hugely between the thinkers themselves. I mean, Adam Smith, for instance, has views on the slave trade which, by modern standards, are, as it were, tick all the right boxes.
I wouldn't necessarily go quite that far, but I take your point. And certainly there's a wide range of opinion in the 18th century. But I would make a more general point, and that is that the treatment of Hume and of some of the other 18th century figures strikes me as being, to a certain extent anyway, an example of what we might call boomerang moralism, by which I mean we are using moral standards to condemn 18th century figures who themselves were part of the history that produced those moral standards themselves. So that
we're using their own tools against them.
The slave trade and overseas slave trade had been around for centuries. I would say not only in Europe, but going back to the Islamic Middle Ages and before. Not only that, but plantation slavery went back centuries. Racially based plantation slavery was not invented by 18th century Europeans. You find it in 9th century Islamic world. And so the reason why we condemn the slave trade and its particularly virulent racist forms today is because of arguments and debates and strife and struggle that was engaged in by black people and white people alike, including leading Enlightenment figures in the course of the second half of the 18th century and into the 19th century. And we're using those standards against the very people who produced those standards in the first place. To put it another way, there's no reason that I know of to believe that in the absence of the 18th century European Enlightenment, that slavery and the slave trade would not have continued indefinitely for centuries on into the future. There was great reluctance in the non-Western part of the world to bring an end to the slave trade when the British Navy got busy in the 19th century and attempted to stamp it out root and branch. So that's why I call it a kind of boomerang moralism. Certainly, again, as on the case of religion, there's a difference between Adam Smith and David Hume on the subject of slavery. Smith's views are very clear about that. He writes about it in every one of his works.